Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Qualifying for the Canadian Grand Prix is today, and after yesterday's practice we are really none the wiser as to who is going to come out on top. A big drama elsewhere in the paddock as well. Red Bull having serious problems with Max Verstappen's car, but also Red Bull potentially not happy at all with the 2026 set of regulations. An emergency meeting is due to be held today in Montreal as the teams will go to war on what they think are serious problems with the next set of rules. Will anyone come out on top? What are the changes they want to see? Because some are suggesting that the FIA need to push back the day where the rules are absolutely locked in to make major changes to ensure that these Formula 1 cars in 2026 aren't as slow as Formula 2 cars of the present day. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, we've got to dive into all the drama around yesterday's practice. James Vowles actually made it very clear. They want Carlos Sainz. They would love a Sainz-Albon pairing, and Vowles has been actually quite public in basically saying, yes, these are various reasons why you should join us, Carlos. And, well, he has to make up his mind between Audi, effectively, and Williams. There's the debate either way. We've had it over the last few days, but Val says, look, we're trending in a good direction. We're hiring on big names. You would be more than welcome to join us on that journey. Yesterday's practice, though, these were the list of upgrades. Nothing for McLaren, nothing for Ferrari. I think Red Bull brought a new rear wing and something on reliability. Mercedes, of course, they brought a couple of things as they always have been. Interestingly enough, though, Mercedes yesterday, they were running the old front wing spec. So I think they were testing that with some sort of suspension tweak they've made. And then I guess we'll see today what they do with the newer front wing spec if they decide to run that, but not much meaningful practice running yesterday. Red Bull come into this weekend expecting to have a harder time again. We'll see if that remains true. And in Spain, Red Bull will be bringing upgrades. Helmut Marko says, we've got a problem with the car running the, riding the curb, stuff like this. Now we've finally noticed it. We will see when we find a solution. This is, the lag time, right? They know they've got a problem. Now they've got to try and solve it. They're confident they can solve it, or at least improve it this year, not just for next year's car. New parts will not be installed on the car until Barcelona, he says. But even then, are those going to be parts that address the current weaknesses? Not necessarily, but Red Bull say, look, it's something we're working on to try and make better. This takes time, not something that can be solved immediately, but Max does say, we're still confident we can do a better job on it this year, and after Monaco, we've got a good direction to work towards. So there's some debate on how quickly Red Bull are going to get on top of these issues, but if they can't do so, and especially practice yesterday, again, was not especially good for them. Lots of drama during practice, Alonso and many other drivers having a go at the Ferraris for being slow in the final corner. I think even Carlos Sainz got caught out for that here, because it last year or something. This guy and the Ferraris in general were definitely having their way with the heads of the opposition, getting in their head rent-free and all this. These were the results though from practice. Now, as I say, not much meaningful running to take away from this, largely because this session was wet. Towards the end of the session, though, it was drying up, and the only meaningful thing that I would take away from this, because the rest of the weekend is also likely to be affected by rain, at least in some parts, is that the McLarens and the Ferraris seems to be stronger than their competitors in getting the tyres up to temperature and in the right window, right? Getting the inters to work properly in those type of conditions is a challenge, and it seems like the McLaren was pretty good at that. But, I mean, there really isn't that much to take away here because the session was drying up so massively. And then the second session started dry, then it rains. Alonso had the fastest time here, but again, not too much meaningful data to read into. What I will say is that Verstappen was P18, and this was because, in large part, his car wasn't great, but also they had serious problems with the car. But interesting to think that we came out of practice yesterday with really no idea who's the fastest team. Is McLaren the fastest? Is Ferrari the fastest? Is it still Red Bull? Who knows? Hamilton says that he feels like they're closer to the front than they previously were, Mercedes. But, I don't really know if Mercedes know that, and they've said that before on a Friday. Who knows if that's true or not? So we're going in blind, really, to today's qualifying, and, probably it's going to be rain affected as well. Certainly the weather report still indicates that rain is definitely possible today and tomorrow during those qualifying times. There was also drama for Ferrari because they put Charles Leclerc on the track with inters on when the track was not yet declared wet, which you're not allowed to do. Now, it's like, oh my god, disqualify Leclerc, put it back to the field, like, that was never going to happen. They've been fined €5,000 for this one, so I'm not sure Ferrari will be too frustrated about that. But this is the issue with the Red Bull, right? Because not only did the car not look exactly great in the hands of Max or Perez, but he had to get out of the car, Max, because they had an ERS problem. He was smelling smoke, the car was kind of smoking from the rear, and as we see in this shot, they built a wall of engineers to prevent us actually seeing what was going on here. So, yeah, Red Bull had what they believe was like an ERS failure. Now, like an ERS issue or something like that, which of course is the battery system. So it's a little bit concerning for Red Bull because they put in brand new parts to the car earlier in the day. Brand new engine, brand new like MGUK, UH, I think pretty much all the parts that they put in were basically brand new to the car. And they had an ERS issue later in the day. Now, I guess the good news for Red Bull is that apparently the issue they had was with an older engine in the car. So they ran the old engine in FP2 that they're not going to use for the rest of the weekend. So I guess one positive here for Red Bull is that, you know, it's not like this failure will have affected their new engine. But it's still an issue that I don't know if they really know what caused it. And that is the point of concern here really for Red Bull, because they put a brand new ICE, brand new turbo, MGUH and UK in FP1, and there was some sort of ERS faults that brought the session to a close. Now, it's not the end of the world for Max because there was no real meaningful running done anyway from that point to the end of the session, so it's not like they lost loads of laps, but as Max says, this kind of losing the laps isn't so important. What's more important is to figure out actually what happens and any kind of implications for this weekend or the rest of the year. So I wouldn't quite go as far to say when it rains it pours, but it certainly does feel like a Red Bull. They've been having a harder time lately. And everything is kind of compounded. All the drama back in February and in March and in April over what was happening behind the scenes between Horner and Marco and everything involved to that extent has now kind of continued onwards, but now it's the on-track stuff that's going on. Their car isn't quite as strong as it was before. There's, Perez is crashing out of races, not scoring points. The car's bad over the curbs in Monaco, only scoring P6 with Max Verstappen. Like, various problems they're running into, and now their ERS is having issues, right? They're stuck in the garage. Their setup isn't quite perfect. Like, this is how it goes. Like, when everything's all sunshine and rainbows, everything feels very easy. But when one or two things start to go wrong, all of a sudden you're now vulnerable because you don't get the practice time you need. Are we confident the setup's going to work as it was meant to do based on the simulator running? Like, all these other problems Red Bull now have to deal with. Even James Allison is turning the screw to some degree, or twisting the knife, whatever you want to say, because he says that, yeah, as far as he is concerned, or at least as far as he sees, the Red Bull package they brought in Imola seems like a downgrade. That was actually his words, right? He said, yeah, seems like they're a downgrade, and therefore that wastes you time. As Allison knows full well, and Mercedes know full well about downgrades, and they know full well about upgrades not performing what they were meant to do over the last couple of years. But he says, yeah, like, you can't afford to waste time in this game. And I think later in the interview, he was asked the question, like, do you feel satisfaction when, Red Bull are struggling? And he's like, look, everyone in this sport enjoys the misery of others. I think Allison's always very entertaining to listen to and very eloquent indeed. But Allison believes, and Mercedes believe, and the other teams seem to believe, that probably that Imola package was certainly not an upgrade for the Red Bull, and it may have even taken them a step back. This, of course, comes when, going into Imola, Helmut Marko said, yeah, we expect a big step from this package after their loss in Miami. They did win Imola, right? But the feeling tends to be from other teams that package they brought in Imola has certainly not massively helped them, and maybe even has, exacerbated other weaknesses with the car that now they've got to go back and resolve. Maybe not in a similar way, but that's kind of what's happened to Aston Martin at this very circuit last year. They brought upgrades to Canada. They did well. They came second that Grand Prix with Alonso, but they soon after Canada realised their upgrades actually weren't upgrades at all, and in the longer term, they were causing problems that have taken them a long time to resolve, and they haven't even resolved them yet. So that is the feeling potentially from Mercedes, that Red Bull are going to waste time figuring out their weaknesses, which is going to give time for Ferrari, for McLaren, and potentially for Mercedes to actually catch up and get seriously back into the mix. But we've got to talk about the other drama of the day as well, which was on, again, the 2026 regulations. We saw them confirmed a couple of days ago, at least revealed to the public. There were then rumours shortly afterwards that a number of teams are deeply dissatisfied with the way these regulations have gone, and I mean, we talked about it yesterday. Apparently 2 teams have threatened to just quit the sport if things aren't changed. Now, let's just caveat this a little bit. Every single time that there are major regulation changes, there are teams complaining. That's what they do. They love complaining. This is how they operate, right? And they love to complain about things and, well, try and make sure that changes are made and say, oh, the regulations are going to be terrible. They're going to be so slow. The cars are going to be awful. And usually when we turn up to the track, it ain't that bad, right? Usually it's kind of overblown, the cars are actually okay, and often it's the teams that say this that they don't want so much change, right? Like if you're Red Bull, just for example, and I think Red Bull have been quite clear they don't really like the way these regulations are going, they don't like the engine side, I don't really think they like the aero side, but even if that's just their own personal, perspective on it, you also got to realise that Red Bull love these current regulations. So if there's a world where they could say, look, the 2026 regs are terrible, we've got to just postpone them indefinitely, then maybe they would take you up on that offer, right? But of course other teams may have a different point of view. The problem is that these cars have active aerodynamics, and that may not be a problem, that may be okay. We've seen it on the front and rear wings over the last couple of days, the way that the rear wing flap is going to change angle to have X mode on the straights and then Z mode in the corners when you go, higher downforce or lower downforce mode respectively. The reason why that is necessary is because the electrical engines are so thirsty that if the cars are high drag, they just won't have enough juice to even get going or maintain any speed by the end of, many straights in Formula 1, such as, for example, at Monza. So the solution is we have active aerodynamics. The problem that creates, though, is that the cars are going to be rapid on the straights. They are going to be a very low drag car in a straight line. But in the corners, they are just not going to have quite the downforce because the floor is much weaker than before. And Andrea Stella says these have to be rebalanced. The cars, I think even George Russell made the point that these cars are potentially going to be getting to 360, 370, maybe like 380 kilometers an hour. So we're talking 230 miles an hour, which is rapid. I mean, that's like Indy 500 speeds with no downforce at all. So apparently that's how quick the cars could be. And of course, the drivers get concerned because that's like, well, if we're going that fast, that could be a bit of a big risk in terms of crashes, right? Like if you crash out at 370 kilometers an hour because your rear wing aerodynamics didn't reactivate properly because the aero actuator failed and there's no natural drag to put it back into place because the way the active aero works, that could be a serious problem. So the drivers are concerned about safety. The teams are concerned they're going to be really slow, potentially too prescriptive, as in you can't do much with it, and just generally dangerous and potentially problematic for the cost cap. There's loads of problems. The teams are also saying these cars are going to be potentially as slow as F2 today. The rumour is that these new cars are going to be roughly 8 seconds a lap slower than they were in 2024, right, today. This was a talking point going into 2022 when the cars were going to be slower than in 2021, but that was by a matter of, 3 or so seconds. And even over the last couple of years, we have seen that at certain tracks, these current cars can go just as fast as the previous generation can. Not all tracks, but, they're still fast enough to look like Formula 1. The concern is these cars might be so slow, at least in the corners, that they're going to basically be Formula 2 cars of today, which they don't look fast. If the racing's good, it's okay, but do I trust the racing to be better? I'm not so convinced that I do, because the cars are still going to be massive, let's be honest. So there is some mixed opinion on this, but the reality is that most teams are not happy, or at least have some things they would like to change with the rules. Pat Fry from Williams says, 2026 F1 rules still need some work. It's not the disaster that it was looking like right at the start. There were quite a few teams saying that it was an absolute disaster, and apparently that still remains true based on the last couple of days. But Autosport yesterday were reporting that today, probably right about now actually, maybe in a couple of hours time, in Canada, in Montreal, for the Canadian Grand Prix, there is going to be a big meeting of the team bosses amid concern over the rules. So putting together an emergency meeting note at the very least to discuss what they see as severe problems. So look, there's lots of worries on this. We talked about the main worries yesterday on the active aerodynamics and some of these other potential problems. Currently central to the concern is that some teams feel the FIA has pushed on with elements of the rules they do not think will work in the way that they are intended. This includes the overall aerodynamic concept, with some teams suggesting the new cars will be especially slow because they'll be lacking downforce and frequently run out of battery power. That's the whole point of the active aero, is to ensure that the battery power gets you quite some way, but who knows if it's going to work as they intend it to work. And also the way the override mode works, the fact that it gives you extra power if you're within a certain amount of the car in front of you to a certain level, which allows you to gain a slightly greater top speed. which maybe is going to work, but like, how do we know if that's going to be an appropriate way to replace DRS? What does it mean? Because the cars are less draggy, therefore less dirty air, therefore less slipstream. So how does that change the balance of overtaking? Tough to say. The FIA say that they need to be published and like absolutely finalized by the 30th of June, 1.5 years before it comes into force. After that period, revisions require support from the competitors, which could prove troublesome as it is understood not all teams are on the same page about what should be done. So these regulations that we have seen announced over the last couple of days are the regulations that we have seen publicly, but the actual full booklet that goes to the teams and says, hey, these are the legality boxes. This is like the full list of the way that we're describing every single facet of these regulations. This is what you've got to adhere to. That is not due for like a little bit of time. It's meant to arrive in the middle of June. But the teams are saying, no guys, these regs ain't working. We want to make changes and we want to push back the publish date. They're saying that how about we leave it until October to finalize the rules, fine-tune the rules, which to be fair might not be unreasonable because it's January 1st, 2025 when the teams are allowed to start working on these new regs. So they can't work on them anyway. Do they need to be finalised by the end of June when you've got 6 months to stare at the piece of paper and not do anything? Probably not. They can take their time here. But apparently this was proposed, but one team has blocked it, feeling that it's important that the FIA sticks to the June deadline. So we can speculate all you like on which team has blocked it, because I don't think a team would block it thinking, oh, I really want to stick to the rules and ensure that the FIA say June, it's got to be June. I think the reality is one of these teams kind of likes these rules and says, you know what, this might give us a chance. So they're going to say, absolutely no, we're not making any changes. If I had to guess what that team is, I would say Mercedes, just because if I look at these regulations, I would say Mercedes would be quite happy with them. Like, the problems they've had the last couple of years should be diminished by these changes, and we think they have the best engine, basically. And engine power might be very, very important in this new era of regs, kind of like how it was back in 2014 when we had the most recent major overhaul to the regulations themselves. Adrian Newey has been quite blunt on this. Well, he says, I understand what the FIA is trying to achieve. Whether that's a good direction or not, I'm probably better off not commenting. So, yeah, maybe read between the lines somewhat on that. Obviously, Max Verstappen wasn't so satisfied with it either. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Big drama right now in Montreal with qualifying, free practice, and then qualifying coming up later on today. Who's going to stick it on pole? I genuinely have absolutely no idea. One man that's probably not is Daniel Ricciardo. Just wanted to mention this because it caused some friction yesterday in the scene. Jacques Villeneuve, 1997 world champion, Indy 500 winner, was on the broadcast yesterday making very blunt assessments of what he thinks. Like, this was his assessment of Daniel Ricciardo, and this is, it's pretty brutal. Now, is it brutally honest as far as Villeneuve is concerned? Absolutely yes. And I thought that, to me, it was a refreshing change to see some, brutal honesty from the pundits' opinions on, he basically said, yeah, Ricciardo was never good, and he doesn't deserve to be on the grid nowadays. Now, I don't agree with that assessment. I do think Ricciardo was very good. Maybe in the last couple of years, he's only getting a drive for reasons of his popularity, and I'm not sure I agree with Villeneuve's perspective entirely, but I thought that it was interesting to see somebody be very, out there with their opinions. I think, to be honest, it's good for the, the general commentary and punditry that people are willing to give hot takes and then back it up with their opinion, especially if they're people that have achieved an awful lot within the sport. So I know it caused some friction though, because people are like, wow, how dare Villeneuve say this? But I think it's part of the game, to be honest. But very much interested to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.